Hello, this is History for Wednesday, April 22nd. We're going to be studying Lesson 66, which is Mao Zedong forms the People's Republic of China. The date is October 1st, 1949. So the last time you all looked closely at China, it was suffering under a massive civil war in the late 1800s. It was called the Taiping Rebellion. That name should trigger a memory of Hudson Taylor, who served as a Christian missionary during the difficult time. On the heels of the Taiping Rebellion, with a shaky economy, China was ripe for revolution in the 20th century. It came in two waves. The first wave was the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, held by the Manchu for 2.5 centuries. That would be the last of a long line of dynasties in China. The second wave of revolution was the formation of the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong, one of the world's most notorious communist dictators. Here is the story of how China ultimately submitted to communism and the events that followed. The Qing dynasty was a foreign dynasty. Its rulers were from Manchuria, and thus they were called the Manchu. You may remember Kangxi from a previous volume. He, ruling in the late 1600s, was one of the most prosperous Manchu emperors who ever reigned. It was not until the 1900s that Manchu rule began to fall apart. A Manchu empress died in 1908, leaving a 2-year-old on the throne. With Manchu power in a weakened state, a Chinese doctor named Sun Yat-sen led a successful revolt against the Manchu in 1911 to 1912. He converted China into a modern republic called simply the Republic of China. But do not confuse Republic of China with People's Republic of China. They are not the same. Sun Yat-sen had at one time been educated in Hawaii. While there, he was exposed to the gospel, which he embraced later in life. Influenced by his Christian faith and his world travels, Sun Yat-sen believed China needed to break away from imperial rule altogether and end the 2,000-year tradition of dynasties, which 2,000 years is a long tradition. Here's a picture of Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen was and still is widely loved by the people of China for breaking the chain of foreign Manchu rule. Many refer to him as the founding father of Republican China. However, the Republic of China was not to last long on the mainland. It was severely divided by two political parties, the Communists and the Nationalists. Sun Yat-sen helped found the Nationalist Party, which is also called Kuomintang. Both communists and nationalists agreed on the need to end imperial rule, but they disagreed on what form of government should follow. The nationalists, Kuomintang, followed a form of democracy. The communists favored, that's right, communism. They favored communism based on the theories of Karl Marx. A great clash of worldviews began to brew in China, which eventually led to another civil war. Unfortunately for the nationalists, Sun Yat-sen died of cancer in 1925. Leadership of the Nationalist Party then went to Chiang Kai-shek. Leading the communists was Mao Zedong. Since Mao Zedong is the main focus of our lesson, let's back up a little and see how he gained firm control over the Communist Party of China. Born into a peasant family, Mao Zedong went to work at the age of 6, helping his parents run a farm. His father was strict and abusive. His mother was a devout Buddhist. Growing up in this environment, Mao was well acquainted with work and hardship. After some teacher training, Mao worked as a librarian assistant at the University of Beijing. It was there he began to read the works of Karl Marx and fully embrace the ideas of communism. With an interest in politics, Mao Zedong first went to work with the Nationalist Party. However, after the death of Sun Yat-sen, the Nationalists turned ferocious toward any and all communists among them. In fact, under Chiang Kai-shek, a purge took place within the Nationalist Party to rid it of communist thinkers. This forced Mao Zedong to part ways with the Nationalists for good and establish his own communist government. He set up a territory in southern China called Zhongshi Soviet. It had its own money, its own bank, and its own tax system. Believe it or not, there were two Chinas from about 1931 to 1933. And here you can see a picture of Mao Zedong. At its peak, the Zhongshi Soviet territory was 30,000 square kilometers, which is about 11,580 square miles, and it was home to 3 million people. Extra funding came through the trade of opium, which Mao Zedong authorized. Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader, was outraged at the growth of this communist territory and schemed the demise of Mao's forces. Chiang Kai-shek's troops encircled Mao's territory with a massive army, forcing Mao Zedong and 100,000 of Mao's army to march at least 6,000 miles to safety in what history has termed the Long March. At the rate of 50 or more miles per day, Mao and his army trudged over mountains and through swamps over the course of a year, with little to no food along the way. If this wasn't difficult enough, parts of their journey were through snow and thick ice. Roughly 80,000 of Mao's men died in the unbearable conditions of the Long March. As brutal and torturous as it was, something positive did come out of the Long March for the communists. As Mao marched through towns and villages to reach his destinations, he was hailed a hero, except by Christians whom he persecuted. By and large, the peasant masses admired him, or in some cases feared him. They admired him for fighting against the Nationalist Party, which by then was despised for several reasons. The masses blamed the Nationalists for rising inflation, government corruption, and a poor economy. Though Chiang Kai-shek was victorious in driving the communists out of the Zhongshi Soviet territory, the majority of the Chinese turned against him. They flocked to Mao Zedong for leadership and clung to his promises for reform. Like the Soviet Union under Lenin, many were coerced to follow Mao Zedong. Mao and his loyal troops regrouped in the His loyal troops regrouped in the Shaanxi province, and the Chinese Civil War between nationalists and communists followed. In an odd twist of events, the Chinese Civil War was put on hold in 1937, which was the year that the Japanese invaded Manchuria. Japan and China were fighting over Manchuria years before World War II was official. Do you remember the attack on the city of Nanking? The city of Nanking happened to be the headquarters of the Nationalist Party. When the Japanese attacked Nanking, nationalist officials fled for their lives, and they had only one place to go. That was into the arms of their enemies, the Communist Chinese. The nationalists joined forces with the communists to fight the Japanese. That was strange. This desperate arrangement lasted 8 years, with each political party of the Chinese just barely tolerating the other. In fact, after the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Japan and Japan surrendered to the Allies, the nationalists and communists quickly split apart to resume the unfinished business of the Chinese Civil War. Can you imagine the turmoil of the people? The second round of the Chinese Civil War was lopsided in manpower and resources. The nationalists were spent and exhausted after World War II because they had done most of the fighting against Japan. The communists, however, had reserved their strength and grown in power with the help of the Soviet Union and the United States. Joseph Stalin, a Soviet communist through and through, was glad to see his big neighbor turn communist, and so he offered his assistance to China as might be expected. The United States originally supported the nationalists, but switched its loyalties to Mao Zedong, whom liberal Americans perceived as an agrarian reformer and a true man of the people. With a skewed understanding of Mao's full vision for China, the United States offered assistance to his regime. Considering how jumpy Americans were about communism, this was an ironic gesture on the part of the United States. In a matter of 3 years, Mao Zedong and his Communist Party had clearly gained the upper hand in China with the help of both the Soviet Union and the United States. After losing 1 to 3 million people in the Chinese Civil War, the nationalists gave up their fight. In May of 1949, the nationalists moved their party headquarters and 2 million citizens to the beautiful island of Taiwan, which was formerly known as Formosa. As of this writing, the Nationalists Party is still there, governing the Republic of China in Taiwan. Since the Communists and the Nationalists never signed a peace treaty, some would say the Chinese Civil War is still underway. And in some ways it is, because debate still exists over which political party rightfully governs Taiwan. Both governments have an interest in claiming the island. As for mainland China, with the Nationalist Party out of the way, Mao Zedong declared his country a single-party communist state on October 1st, 1949. The new nation was titled the People's Republic of China. It boasted a bold red flag with one large golden star to represent the Communist Party of China and 4 small golden stars to represent the 4 social classes of the Chinese people. Though similar in name to Sun Yat-sen's Republic of China, the People's Republic of China was quite different. Let's look more closely at Communist China under Mao Zedong and the events that followed its formation. Here's a picture of the flag. Mao Zedong, who titled himself Chairman Mao, is a character of mixed reputations. On one hand, he wrote poetry to stir the hearts of his people, and he simplified the Chinese alphabet to improve literacy. He also did much to stabilize China after its Second Civil War and its involvement in World War II. Many Chinese today revere him. On the other hand, in the process of providing this stability, Chairman Mao was responsible for the deaths of millions of Chinese from execution, as well as from starvation resulting from his economic policies. Estimates of the number of deaths vary greatly, ranging from 30 to more than 70 million. These startling numbers mark Mao Zedong as the deadliest dictator in recorded history, killing far more than Stalin and Hitler did during their days in power. 4 years after the People's Republic of China was established by Mao, China sided with communists in the Korean War. After the Korean War, Mao started a 5-year plan for China patterned after Stalin's plan for the Soviet Union. Stalin forced peasant farmers to join collective farms where all resources were pooled together. The strategy backfired in Russia and led to serious food shortages and widespread famine. Regardless, Mao copied this strategy thinking he could improve it. He proceeded to force farmers into collectives while he abolished private industry, nationalized banks and factories, and set prices to control inflation. The oppression under Mao escalated, and approximately 800,000 died of starvation trying to implement Mao's first 5-year plan. Despite the gross food shortages, China saw some economic improvements under Chairman Mao. Things were going so well by the late 1950s that Mao Zedong lightened up on restrictions against free speech. Under what was called the 100 Flowers policy, Mao allowed people to speak openly about the new communist government. But that didn't last long. When a great deal of criticism spewed forth from the masses, Mao put an abrupt end to the free speech policy. Protecting his position, he came down hard on those surrounding him. Like Stalin, he instigated a deadly purge to rid himself of critics. Contributing to the death toll already mentioned, Mao Zedong led a horrific invasion of Tibet in the 1950s. Tibet, which was once a self-governing Buddhist state and by altitude the highest region in the world, is now a disputed region located southwest of China. Mao informed the 14th Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama is the Buddhist monk or ruler of Tibet, that religion is poison. Tibet and Mongolia have both been poisoned by it. With this personal attack on religion, Mao proceeded to severely persecute the Tibetan people. And here's a picture of the palace in Tibet, which was formerly the home of the Dalai Lama. Implementing some of the cruelest and most vicious persecution in history, Mao saw to the deaths of at least 1 million in Tibet through famine, violence, forced labor in thought reform labor camps. Just like Stalin, Mao had labor camps designed to reform his enemies and provide free manpower. Lesser known to the Western world, Chinese work camps are called laogai. Lao means labor, and gai means reform. According to the Laogai Research Foundation, there are as many as 1,000 camps still in operation to reform Tibetans, other enemies of China, and legitimate criminals. It's believed that as many as 50 million Chinese have suffered in the Laogai since the early 1950s. As for Tibet, it continues to struggle for freedom from China with peaceful protests. At present, the 14th Dalai Lama lives in exile in India and promotes nonviolence and compassion. For his peaceful efforts to restore Tibet, the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. Getting back to the original timeline, in 1958, Chairman Mao tried to speed up the ideals of communism through another 5-year plan called the Great Leap Forward. In this plan, Mao believed that Chinese communism needed to look and feel different from Soviet communism. He turned to rural peasant farmers as well as city workers to provide an endless source of labor in the production of steel. Mao believed that the steel industry would make China one of the most prosperous nations in the world. He insisted that everyone work day and night at steel production in the cities and throughout the countryside. Unfortunately, the Great Leap coincided with 3 years of bad weather and weak harvests. Bundled with steel production, this led to unimaginable famine. You see, to meet certain quotas in steel production, farmers were forced to melt down their plows and their cooking utensils. Without these items, farming and cooking suffered. With scant crops from the famine, food ran out. It is believed that 20 to 30 million Chinese died of starvation under the Great Leap Forward. This wasn't the progress that Mao had promised. Mao said in his defense, "It is better to let half of the people die so that the other half can eat their fill." In 1959, under tremendous pressure, Mao eventually resigned as head of state after the Great Leap Forward. He gave the position to his vice chairman, Mao, however, did not disappear. He remained as head of the Chinese Communist Party and turned to ideological changes. In 1966, Mao Zedong launched a cultural revolution that was to last for 10 years. He hoped to revive communism among a younger generation of Chinese and make a personal comeback. Mao's way of reviving communism was to encourage Chinese youth to rebel against anything and everything that wasn't purely communist by the Chinese definition. After Stalin died, Mao turned completely against the Russian model of communism in favor of Chinese communism. Red Guard units, as Mao's rebels were called, proceeded to terrorize schools and neighborhoods, ridding China of free thinkers, revisionists, and capitalists. Thousands of Chinese died directly from the riots of the Cultural Revolution. Millions were attacked and beaten. Homes, buildings, and properties were destroyed in the chaos, and all religious institutions were closed, Buddhist, Christian, and Islamic. In line with the teachings of Karl Marx, Chinese communists promoted pure atheism. The Christian church moved underground to house churches where millions of Christians worshipped in secret and shared the gospel in private. A great deal of propaganda was used by Mao to promote himself and the Cultural Revolution. Using all the techniques of a personality cult leader, he kept his private life a secret and raised his public image as far as the eye could see by placing his portrait all over China. He also distributed to every Chinese citizen a copy of the Quotations of Chairman Mao, a little red book of Mao's saying. In 1967 alone, 350 million copies were made. Mao Zedong died from a prolonged illness in 1976. Being a heavy smoker, he may have died from emphysema or conditions related to it. Before his death, Mao tried to rein in the Red Guard and stop the Cultural Revolution that raged out of control. It was causing more harm than good, causing the working class of China to rebel against authority. The fight for control of China continued after Mao died. His widow and 3 others, nicknamed the Gang of Four, tried to keep the Cultural Revolution alive with strong ideas of communism. It failed, and the Gang of Four was arrested and sentenced to death by the more moderate leaders of China. Opponents of the Cultural Revolution under Deng Xiaoping took control of China and made great strides to modernize the country in the late 1970s. As recently as 1989, students protested against communism near Tiananmen Square in Beijing. As untold number of students died at the hands of the government because the students would not give way to the voice of the people. An untold number of students were plowed down and died at the hands of the government, which would not give way to the voice of the people. As for Mao Zedong, the mega numbers who died under him reveal a true dictator. Though much less is known about Mao's personal life than is known about Hitler's or Stalin's, his actions appear every bit as hardened against the value of human life. At the enormous cost of 30 to possibly more than 70 million people who were starved, executed, or killed by violence, Mao Zedong was committed above all to making China the strongest communist nation in the world.